enter people when they come. This event is for the anniversary of the Women Life Freedom Movement, and is about state and public violence. Violence against women is a global issue, long recognized as one of the most pressing concerns on the feminist agenda. Despite over a century of women's struggle, the problem persists, leading to the adoption of few international resolutions. In response, some states have implemented national action plans aimed at protecting women. Protecting women from violence, which can be categorized into domestic and public spheres, each with multiple subcategories. States and justice system have a fundamental duty to protect their citizens. However, in many countries, particularly in the Muslim majority countries, gender inequality persists, with women often relegated to second-class citizens. As a result, both domestic and public violence remains a significant concern in many states, including WANA region, the West Asia and North Africa, then also called the Middle East. In my country, Iran, the Islamic regime imposed the Sharia law almost 56 years ago, resulting in a system of gender apartheid. Under this legal framework, various forms of violence against women have been legitimized. For example, a father is regarded as the owner of his daughter's blood, and if he kills her, it is not considered a crime. If someone else kills a woman, the father's forgiveness, can you please mute your microphones, please, everybody? Or acceptance of blood money can prevent the killer from facing punishment. This has led to alarming rise in honor killings in Iran. Additionally, Sharia law, coupled with economic hardship, has driven an increase in child marriages, with girls as young as 10 being affected. Suicide and self-immolation among young women have been serious matters. From the very beginning of the revolution, the imposition of the mandatory hijab became a deeply contentious issue, leading to a sharp increase in public violence. Iranian women have faced brutal assaults, including beating, acid attacks, and even having nails driven into their foreheads. In response to women's resistance, the regime established the so-called morality police, recruiting some of the most violent individuals to enforce the hijab mandate. Women are routinely arrested and subjected to physical, mental, and sexual abuse on the street, in police vehicles, and within detention centers. This brutality has resulted in the deaths of 22 years old Mahsa Jina Amini and 17-year-old Armita Gravand, while a recent shooting by the morality police left 31-year-old Arzu Badri paralyzed, mother of 2 children. Despite extreme state brutality, Iranian women continued their fight against oppression and violence. In Iran, even the demand for the most basic rights is criminalized, with hundreds of women activists currently imprisoned. 4 activists have been sentenced to death, while many others face lengthy prison terms. The 2023 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Narges Mohammadi is sentenced to more than 30 years in prison. Iranian prisons evoke the horrors of infamous prisons like the Bastille and Guantanamo. The Islamic regime is not the only one enforcing gender apartheid and violating women's rights. We have heard numerous distressing accounts of violence against women from neighboring countries, both near and far. In light of the second anniversary of the Women Life Freedom Movement, which has the potential to serve as a global manifesto for feminist movements, we have invited 3 distinguished scholars and women's rights advocates to discuss state and public violence in the Arab world, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. But before I introduce our first speaker, I will invite you to watch a short film that the International Committee of the Stop Honor Killings organization has made for this event. Please.
Sharifa Mohammadi, labor activist, death sentence.
Varish Moradi, death sentence.
Pakhshan Azizi, death sentence.
Nasim Gholami Samyari, waiting for her death sentence.
Zainab Jalalian, life sentence, Yazd prison.
Nahid Taqabi, sentenced to 10 years and 8 months prison.
Narges Mohammadi, sentenced to 35 years.
Sepide Qolian, sentenced to 19 years.
Fatemeh Sepehri, sentenced to 6.5 years in prison and 158 lashes.
Mateen Yazdani, sentenced to 9 years.
Sara Jahani, prison sentence for 6 years.
Golrukh Ibrahimi, sentenced to 7 years. Rezvane Ahmad Khanbegi, 5-year prison sentence.
Hajar Saidi, sentenced to 4 years.
Furu Samia, prison sentence for 6 years in Lakan, Rasht.
Yasmin Hashdari, sentenced 3 years and 6 months.
Nahid Shirkishe, mother of a martyr, sentenced to 4 years imprisonment.
Salmanaz Ahmadi, sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison.
Mahbube Rezai, 2 years and 6 months imprisonment.
Elahi Ustadi, sentenced 1 year imprisonment.
Narges Mansouri, labor union member, political prisoner.
Jelve Jawahiri, prison sentence for 1 year.
Two years ago, the death of Jina Mahsa Amini in police custody marked the beginning of the Jina movement, known globally as the Woman Life Freedom Movement. This was not the first or the last time that an Iranian woman was subjected to state violence. Since the first days of the Islamic Republic 45 years ago, Iranian women have been fighting for their basic human rights. The government's response to women's legitimate demands is imprisonment, torture, and death sentences. The photos you saw are a fraction of several hundred imprisoned women whose freedom we are fighting for. We need global support, especially from our fellow sisters around the world.
Nadia Al-Ali is Robert Family Professor of International Study and Professor of Anthropology and Middle East Studies at Brown. Her main research interests revolve around feminist activism and gender mobilization, mainly with reference to Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, and Kurdish political movement. She has a lot of publications that you can search her. She is one of the famous researchers, but I just mentioned her last works. Her co-edited book with Deborah Al-Najjar, I always pronounce her name wrong, entitled We Are Iraqis, Atheistics and Politics in Time of War. This book won the 2014 Arab American Book Prize for Nonfiction. Her most recent publication is a co-edited book jointly with Dennis Candioti and Catherine Spellman-Putz. She is entitled Gender, Governance, and Islam, which this is from 2019. Professor Al-Ali is on the advisory board of COAL, which is a journal of body and gender research, and has been involved in several feminist organizations and campaigns transnationally. Professor Nadia Al-Ali will speak about gender-based violence by state and non-state actors, a focus on Iraq and Egypt. Professor Nadia, you have 20 minutes. Microphone is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, and thank you all of you for, inviting me and being here. So I would first, like to really express my sense of solidarity and respect, not only on the occasion of, the death of Jina Mahsa Amini, but also more broadly on the, bravery, courage, and really the model that Iranian women's rights activists, both inside and outside Iran, have been sort of shaping, for the last years. So I would also like to say that, initially, so the idea was sort of Arab region, gender-based violence, state-based violence, but obviously it is impossible for me to speak about the Arab region. I mean, it's far too wide and far too different. So I will focus on some case studies, as Susan mentioned, Iraq, Egypt, but I'll also speak a bit about Syria and mention Saudi Arabia. I would also say that I try to avoid using the term Arab countries, as there are ethnic minorities living in all Arab majority countries. So for example, in Iraq, we can't refer to Iraq as an Arab country. I mean, there are large ethnic minorities, I mean, particularly Kurds, but also others. And so I always, I feel like as part of my feminism, I'm also challenging the idea of this notion of Arab countries. And obviously, there are huge variations depending on, the kind of regime, as well, the history of women's rights, the history of gender-based discrimination, but also the history of feminist mobilization in each country. So there are huge variations. We can't speak. I mean, as you saw a picture, this was Saudi Arabia, now a picture of Yemen. War, conflict, poverty, regional and international factors account for huge variation amongst the Arab majority countries. But I guess where we can speak about sort of some similarities across the region, and I think this is not just Arab majority, but more broadly, it also includes Iran and Turkey, is sort of the idea of women being perceived and treated as second-class citizens. And gender-based violence is prevalent, although, there are different degrees and levels of intensity. Now, conceptually, I'm going to challenge the idea of state-based violence in isolation. And this is because I think that the state consists of institutions, political parties, economic and political interest groups, different power holders, and these are also individuals tied to society. I mean, this is not in any way to downplay or to ignore the gap between society at large and authoritarian dictatorial regimes. And I think Iran, of course, is an example where, you know, it's more sort of clear cut in terms of state-based violence. But in most other places that I've been working in, the state does not exist in a vacuum. And what binds the state and both governmental actors to non-governmental actors is, of course, patriarchy, militarism, and heteronormativity. And the impunity of the mainly male perpetrators, whether they're husbands, brothers, sons, or strangers, that also connects societal gender-based violence and state-based violence. So the lack of protection, the lack of training of police, turning victims into guilty people, lack of refuge for women, you know, this all means that whatever is happening in society is also a form of state-based gender-based violence, because it's kind of playing into each other. And Iraq is a case in point. Historically, I mean, I've written about it. I can't go into it, but of course, during the Ba'ath regime, it was more clear-cut in terms of state-based, gender-based violence. But since 2003, it's become more complicated. We have you know, since the invasion 2003 and the occupation, we have various militias, many linked to government parties, some to opposition parties, also criminal gangs, religious authorities, and there are extremely high rates of gender-based violence in Iraq. Women and girls, particularly refugees and internally displaced people, have been trafficked for sexual exploitation by not only criminal gangs, but also by security and law enforcement officials. And, you know, we know that women in poverty have been particularly vulnerable to sexual exploitation. And here, you know, we've seen a kind of combination of incompetence, so state actors and institutions that are incompetent, but also corruption and active involvement in trafficking. So the Iraqi state has been unable, but I would argue as well, unwilling to protect women from the trafficking. Trafficking that has happened mainly from Iraq to Syria, to Jordan, to Qatar and other Gulf countries. It's a little bit less now than it was maybe, you know, the first decade after the invasion. Another issue in Iraq that we've seen at greater height since 2003 is that some Iraqi women and young women, girls, are sold into temporary marriages for the purpose of sexual exploitation or domestic servitude. And that is often in exchange for settling tribal disputes. So this is another issue I think that we have to think about when we think about the state is, you know, there is a level of legal reforms or, you know, legal rights with respect to women, with respect to protecting women, gender-based violence. But even in situations where the laws are okay-ish, I mean, they're never great, but where they're okay, the problem is that the law is not accessible to everyone. I mean, women who don't read or write might not even know their legal rights, but also in terms of actually applying the law, even if you know what your right is, you know, if you don't have the financial means or the kind of political backing, you know, you might not get a good lawyer. And also very importantly, and I don't know whether that's the case also in Iran, but in many Arab majority countries, you have a situation where instead of referring to the law around sexual harassment, domestic violence, is often settled in terms of, more informal tribal or religious courts. And then the whole idea is always just reconciliation, and there's never kind of, punishment, and violence is, exists with impunity. In the Iraqi context, the High Judicial Council, for example, established courts of inquiries for crimes of domestic violence and human trafficking in 2015. But it later abolished it in 2017 because there was too much pressure from several political parties, but from men in society. So, this is another, issue. But even when the law existed, it wasn't really implemented. And where cases of gender-based violence are reported, the authorities frequently attempt to mediate between women and their families so that the women can return home instead of actually applying the law. One specific example also in the Iraqi context is marital rape or rape by a partner is not considered criminal conduct. Women have no resource in terms of the state protecting them. So, this is why I'm kind of challenging the idea of, state-based violence versus societal violence, because I think it's much more of a dialectic. Of course, we know that in the majority countries, corruption plays a big role. And, there was one Iraqi activist who told me that human rights violations are one of the most important lessons that Iraqi security forces have learned from the US and British militaries. So this is referring to the invasion in 2003. Personally, I would argue that Iraqi militia and political parties did not need to learn a lesson from the US or the British. They were quite capable themselves to engage in violations and gender-based violence. So, I'm not one of those people. I've been very critical of, the invasion and occupation of Iraq. And I know this point is very relevant for the Iranian context. So, while I've been very critical of, sanctions against Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, the occupation and continuous meddling, I don't think we should stop there. It is not sufficient to only point the finger at US imperialism, but I think it is very important to point the finger as well as, corrupt politicians, pervasive corruption, pervasive human rights abuses, and Iraqi politicians are not merely puppets of the US, but are, very active agents. So I think that's something where I feel like, there's some overlap in terms of, this tendency to either we have to condemn the US or we have to condemn, the Iraqi regime. I don't think personally it's either or. So what we see in Iraq is that political developments have helped to normalize this violence. Conservative or misogynistic interpretations of religious texts have become pervasive as religious parties and tribal figures have come to power through elections. And similarly to the Iranian situation, there was some public morality police and campaigns, and through instruments such as posters illustrating the proper and improper forms of hijab or modest attire. But very interestingly, this has actually become much less the case since the appearance of ISIS. This was more from like 2004 to 2013. There was a strong kind of public presence and, control of women's dress code, of women's morality, women's mobility. But since the appearance of ISIS, so Daesh in 2014, the threat of Islamism became so apparent that actually Iraqi society has become much more, by and large, I would say much more liberal. And you see actually women wearing a kind of, range of different dress codes. And I was, when I was in January, And I actually felt quite relaxed walking on the street. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still political oppression, that's an authoritarian regime, but just in terms of, you know, as a woman walking on the street, there were no agents of the state nor societal sort of pressures. And everyone told me, well, this has really changed since ISIS, because people were so appalled you know, by ISIS, and so scared of, you know, this version of Islam, that they've become much more relaxed. But more recently, if you've following the news, I mean, the big issue in Iraq right now is, again, the personal status code, which has been under dispute. So the personal status code in Arabic, the Ihwal Shakhsiya, is a set of laws that govern marriage, divorce, child custody, and inheritance. And since 2003, there has been a power struggle over this law that used to be, you know, quite, I mean, relatively egalitarian since 1958. And now the Islamist political party with close links to Iran is trying to shift it to a version of the personal status code that is more aligned with Jafri law. And of course, one of the implications would be that girls as young as nine would be allowed to get married. So there's right now like a big campaign in Iraq, you know, by feminists and also feminists outside. So moving now from Iraq, the personal status law in many Arab majority countries, this law fails to adequately protect women from domestic violence. In Saudi Arabia, for example, the government codified and reformed the personal status law, but instead of promoting equality, status law trenches patriarchal roles by expecting women to obey their husbands. It also makes women's financial support from their husbands during marriage conditional on wives submitting themselves to their husbands. So, of course, these provisions place women at risk of exploitation and abuse. And to Syria. In Syria, we've seen sexual and gender-based violence has been prevalent for decades in both public and private spheres. And the armed conflict, you know, whether you call it civil war or not, you know, reportedly exacerbated the situation. Throughout this conflict, Syrian women and girls have been subjected to different types of violations, such as extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, torture, executions, forced disappearances, sexual violence, displacement, siege warfare, and denial of healthcare and service. Multiple forms of sexual and gender-based violence have been documented in every Syrian governorate, and women have been targeted by state forces as well as by members of other armed factions, including non-state armed groups. However, it is reported that the use of sexual violence has been considerably more common among Syrian government forces and associated pro-government armed groups, and that the Syrian government has used sexual violence as a strategic weapon of war. Government forces and pro-government militias have carried out multiple acts of sexual violence, including during abductions in the context of ground operations, house raids at checkpoints, during attention. Now, the effective protection of women against violence is limited, with enforcement either being weak or non-existent. For example, it is reported that although the law criminalizes rape and sexual assault of women, but again, the government of Syria does not enforce the law effectively. Moreover, the Syrian law reduces or suspends punishment in the cases where the perpetrator of sexual violence marries the victim. And they're also limited to no mechanism available for them to complain. And the absence of law enforcement, including judicial redress mechanisms, allows perpetrators to act with impunity. And in addition, the general lawlessness has led to the corrosion of existing social protection mechanisms among Syrian communities. Also, the remaining I want to, speak about this idea of masculinist restoration. Masculinist restoration is a term that my friend, colleague, and former supervisor Denise Condiotti introduced in the context of the protest movement that started in 2010, 2011. But of course, I would say, going back also to the Green movement in Iran. And that is sort of the idea that patriarchy as usual no longer functions. Patriarchy as usual is under threat from so many different sides. And because patriarchy feels under threat, it tries at all costs with more violent means to keep control. This is what she calls masculinist restoration. And we've seen this, and now I'm shift to Egypt, we've seen this very much during and in the aftermath of protest movements in 2011 and onwards in Egypt. We've seen the targeting during protests. We've seen the sexual harassment of women by police, military, and the Muslim Brotherhood. And here is the famous iconic image of what is called the woman in the blue bra. This is sort of course, graffiti based on the actual event. That created lots of protests in Egypt. But the fact was that during this time, women were targeted. I mean, everyone was targeted, but when women were targeted, it had sort of an additional dimension of kind of sexual harassment and the idea of, trying to humiliate women to the degree that they not anymore. And I guess the worst case was that of virginity testing, so-called virginity testing. And here's actually a picture of Samira Ibrahim, who in a landmark court case, she took actually the Egyptian military to court after she and 12 other young women were subjected to so-called virginity tests following a protest. And, instead of just, trying to not speak about it in silence, she went to court. And she managed to get a judgment that the military is not allowed to use this as a, sort of as a test. But I guess, again, also in the Egyptian context, I would say that, while many people pointed to the gender-based violence at the hands of, the militia, whether the Muslim Brotherhood, the police, the military, often what was not talked about was what I see as a continuum, the harassment and sexual violence that was happening on the streets, just, by people who are not political, at workplace, and in the family. So I guess what I'm sort of the kind of conceptual analytical contribution that I'd like to make is that it is really important to recognize the continuum of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Nadia. It was very, very interesting presentation. Thank you so much.
You can follow me. I'll try to be as concise as possible. And I would like to say that, all women here, and Jaya said that the struggle that women going through are similar. Your misery has company, and you're not alone in this struggle. Of course, Mahsa has become the face of this honor killing campaign. And as tragic as this is, we have many Mahsas in Afghanistan whose deaths we've lost track of in other countries. And it's dystopian. It's an absolute totalitarian regime. Unfortunately, we have to understand that when it comes to hijab and observing hijab, the circumstances of women observing hijab differs a lot within a context in a Western country where a woman is afforded rights and exercises her own agency. And it's much more different than a context where a woman is forced to wear it and is not offered a choice but to observe hijab and otherwise face consequences. And that's sort of what my article it was a short article tackles with that I published with our human rights program at Columbia. I want to start with what's going on with women in Afghanistan. And there is that there is an absolute spike in suicide rates, and I did a research with Afghan Witness. It's an organization that does open source intelligence reports on Afghanistan, and we never really know if these are honor killings in the guise of suicides, and we don't know if Taliban are causing. And we have found some evidence that actually Taliban are executing some of these women under the guise of suicide and declaring it as suicide in the media reports, or families are killing women after they're arrested by the Taliban, and they're raped in Taliban prisons, and as a result, when they come back home, they're either killed by the family or they commit suicide themselves. So it's a bit ambiguous, unfortunately, and it's very hard for me to speak about these. Without going into much details, Taliban declared women should hide their faces in public in May 2022, and they installed hijab checkpoints in various provinces and ordered taxi drivers to not provide services to women unchaperoned and not observing hijab. For instance, a woman who's sick and is unchaperoned could not be picked up by a taxi driver and taken to a hospital. And other than families and culture, of course, victimizing these women, Taliban's morality police have arrested women left and right for not observing hijab and for not having proper dress codes. And as our previous speakers very well mentioned, intersectionality and importance of ethnic minority women. Women are intersectionally oppressed and marginalized in this context. Women from ethnic minority backgrounds go through a much harsher procedure and arrest procedures within the Taliban system. And Taliban also, as we all know, replaced the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan with Ministry of Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Evil, which is Taliban's morality police. And since January 2024, there has been a hijab non-compliance campaign, and the ministry recruited women morality police to arrest other women. So these scenes that we saw from Iran, the similar situation is happening in Afghanistan. Police women are arresting other women who are not observing hijab, and again, ethnic minority women are, at the receiving end of this violence. And in January, so the fate of many of these women who were arrested is unknown. Some of them were released, and after they were released, many of them committed suicide because they were raped in Taliban prisons. And in August this year, this deepened to a new level, and Taliban actually codified all of these restrictions and policies and published them in the official gazette in more than 200 pages. So there is mandatory covering. Women must cover their faces and bodies head to toe. Women must not be allowed to speak in public or sing in public. So women's voices are not allowed in public. And there must be no eye contact between men and women. And of course, I mean, they could not travel unchaperoned without a male guardian. Now it's in the legal codes and bills. And no education beyond 6th grade, and no work in most professions for women, and media restrictions. Women's images are banned from public. So I wouldn't say it's completely Orwellian and dystopian, and it would be a Margaret Atwood a novel basically. I wouldn't say they are second-class citizens. They are dehumanized in every possible way. Women are currently erased completely from the public face in Afghanistan, and women have been resisting in so many ways. So what women have been doing is, they've been protesting against all odds, and it has been historically unprecedented right now. And women went out on the street initially with the slogan of work, bread, and freedom, because there was a huge hunger crisis in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of all humanitarian aid, and women could not work, and they were asking for freedom because there was an entire ban, as there was no constitution, a new government installed, a regime installed. So they started with that slogan, and they've been protesting ever since. but unfortunately, they faced crackdowns. So they took their protests to homes, and they've used sign languages, songs, and poetry, and continued their protest. And we still have some women going on the streets, but it's incredibly dangerous for these women to go on streets and protest. And diaspora women who have been exiled have also been working day and night. They went on hunger strikes. They've been lobbying within different governments and systems to recognize gender apartheid in Afghanistan, and women of Iran have been our greatest allies in this, as they are also working towards this cause. They are also exploring several ways to hold the Taliban to account under the international law, and a few of them are holding Taliban accountable under the Rome Statute of gender persecution crimes. And the second one is holding Taliban accountable under Article 29 of CEDAW Convention against discrimination, Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which was adopted by the General Assembly in 1979 and brought into force in 1981. And it was ratified by Afghanistan without any reservations in 2003. And it was one of the first Muslim countries to ratify it without any reservations. So this was an important achievement for Afghanistan, but currently Afghanistan has violated every single article of CEDAW. So among 189 countries that are part of CEDAW, 150, including Afghanistan, have agreed to Article 29 to allow the International Court of Justice to hear cases under the convention. So a new development that we have had in the last week, and it gives us a flicker of hope, is Germany, Netherlands, Canada, and Australia are taking the Taliban to International Court of Justice. And there will be hopefully a hearing, and after that, a provisional measures, a form of declaration for Afghanistan to uphold its obligations under the international law and CEDAW. And it's hoped that this would be a step to prevent harm and to take measures against Taliban's violence and further crackdown of women's rights. And I will end here, and we'll leave some room for questions. And I apologize again, there wasn't visuals to show you guys, and I hope you were able to follow.
Thank you very, very much. Well, very interesting, and especially the last part that the 4 countries will take. Hope I pronounce your name correctly. She's from Pakistan. Jaya is a development practitioner leading a grassroots collective called She Matters. She has expertise in advocacy, preventing and countering violent extremism, women and peace security, human rights, minority rights, and community engagement. She is core team member of Sanjat Feminist Network. I hope I pronounced it correctly. In South Asia, she is representing Pakistan. She is member of Every Woman Treaty, board member of Forum for Dignity, invites initiatives and advocacy forum for the rights of cis and trans women and Bidari, and organization working on eliminating child early and forced marriage. She worked with United Nations Population Fund as a case management consultant and for gender-based violence. She will speak about echoes of resistance, unmasking violence against women in Pakistan. Jaya, please, microphone is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. While I was listening to our first speaker, I felt like I am listening to exactly what's happening in Pakistan, and it also made me reflect that the situation regarding how we women are treated is no different in different parts of the world. A few months back, we were planning a minority rights march, and that march was led by a few young feminists. And we were continuously visiting our district administration for obtaining a certificate that could allow us to have that gathering on minority rights. And every time we young women were used to go to district officers, they used to humiliate us. We had to wait outside their office for around more than 4 or 5 hours. And every time we were there asking them, and they told that there are a lot of extremist groups that have already filed complaint against us and have strictly told state that if these women are allowed to march, their security would be at risk. I would request the host if I could share my screen because it's disabled. So this is Joy. I am a minority rights, women rights activist. I am unable to share my screen, so I'll just directly go to it. So today I'll be directly talking about a little context of Pakistan, a few women-led movements in Pakistan and how they are facing torture, violence from the state, human rights defenders who have been assassinating, also a few case studies, historical evidence, police and public violence, and then probably the road ahead that we as women intend to take. Thank you so much. I hope my screen is visible to all of you. So quickly, the situation is exactly the same in Pakistan, and this is a very strong reflection of me as a women rights activist, is that women, no matter whether you are in a developed country like USA, in Europe, or maybe in a developing country like Pakistan, women are second-class citizens. In developed countries, you might see women more into socioeconomic political spaces. In Pakistan, comparatively, you might not see them on streets, might not see them more in political spaces, but still, women, no matter where they are no more than a sexual objects, and that's quite obvious and evident how women, even in Europe and America, are treated in clubs, and they are not given equal respect. You might see them doing jobs in streets more than you see them in Pakistan. So these are few little areas we see that there are honor killings, persecution, rape and assault, murders, a big issue of forced conversion, assassination, and most importantly, no implementation of law in the country. Here are a few images of the few issues that we have been going through. Every other day, there are several protests because someone is being raped, a woman is murdered by her immediate family, a woman is sexually assaulted at her workplace, a woman who is a politician faces harassment. Every other day, there's a group of people who are protesting. Every other day, we are having a remembrance day for someone, but the situation has not changed at all. I would quickly share a few case studies. We have a few very important cases of Qandil Baloch. Qandil Baloch comes from a Pashtun family who actually broke the stereotypes of a religious Pashtun family, and she was murdered by her own brother and father because they thought that she brings defame to the family, and the state was unable to take actions against them because everyone was actually celebrating that, yes, such women should be killed because she was very active in media industry. Noor Muqaddam, who was murdered brutally, her body parts were actually broken down into different pieces, and that this might be very traumatic for some of us, but her own boyfriend or friend, he killed her, he murdered her, and just because he comes from an elite family that has a lot of spaces within political dynamics, that person was not set behind. Even the authorities started saying that he was mentally unstable, and that's how they thought that he would be set free. But just because there was a lot of outrage by minority women, by women from different identities, feminist women, women rights activists, women who identify as classical liberals, or women who identify as radical feminists, just because of their flappers, the person was behind the bar. That does come as a success, but I also see it, this success came at the expense of someone's life. Also, the recent case where a young girl was sexually assaulted by police in one of the cities in Pakistan, and these state actors actually cover up the crime, and that's a very usual activity. Whether a woman goes to a police station just to file a complaint, or they come across in any other case, police officials, they start sexually assaulting these women, threaten them, abuse them, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of women do not even go to file a complaint that directly affects them. Moving further, Aurat March is a women-led, one of the biggest marches that we have in the country that started in 2018. And this is a march that we have on 8th of March every year to commemorate Women's Day all across the country. And in major cities of the country, thousands of young women from rural areas, semi-urban areas, women who are adults, women from different professions, they come out on the streets with different placards, and they do this big procession. Now, Aurat March has been struggling. This is one of the two big movements in the countries, but every time they have to be there for a procession, they do not get NOC, that is no objection certificate by the state. The state does not allow them. In opposition, there are some opposing forces who also come outside to have this procession as a resistant or as an opposing force, but the state gives NOC to them. They are allowed to come out to have their procession as a resistance to Aurat March that is led by women, but we women are not. And that's how we see that the state is inclined to opposing forces and not to women. Also, last year I was there as well, and there was a lot of police around us. We were physically attacked. We were attacked with stones. Some of us were dragged. There was shelling on us. And even all the activists in our core team, or most of the time, they're under surveillance. Every time we are there, because I'm one of the core members of Aurat March as well, and every time we have to roam around either in the country or abroad, we have to face surveillance. Most of us have started receiving threats as well as rape threats on social media, just because most of the time what happens is in recent years, the pictures or the slogans are actually deformed pictures that are not true, misinformed, and they come on social media, and then our faces with different slogans that do not maybe align with the religious volatile society are shared. I would also like to add with this that there is another march that is led by Baloch women, and it's at the moment, this is one of the biggest movements that is active in the country. It is led by Maharang Baloch and Samideen. These women are leading this movement against enforced disappearances of their own family members, mostly men. They were there in the federal capital, that is Islamabad, for around 3 months. And I was continuously visiting that space. Number one, every person who was there, because these women, as a protest, they were living in the shelters or under the tents in an open space outside Press Club in our federal capital, and they were demanding justice from the government. So number one, what happened was when these women were coming to the federal capital of the country from their own province, that is Balochistan, all the roads were blocked. Most of them were arrested, and their mobile phones and all other services were taken away from them. Also, when they reached the capital, they were to the police station. There was shelling around them. There was tear gas. And I was talking to one of the person who is an active member of the march and was taken to police station. The situation in the police station where there were women police officials, that's the terrible situation was there. What happened was they took all of these leaders of this movement into the police station, and they put them into one of the prisons over there that was a cell, and they sent a naked women inside the cell, and that naked women was shouting, and the purpose was just to mentally torture these women. And I could not even imagine that horrible situation. The women who were there inside, few of them had kids with them. They were all taken away. They were beaten over there. Most of them were dragged by their hair, and then the police officials who were women were not kind. They were there torturing them, doing emotional abuse with them, and they really wanted that through this approach, they actually do not come to that space for a protest, rather they go back to the city. But yes, definitely all of us into the capital, they came together, and it was a resistance against them that no, the movement continued. Eventually, a lot of young women and even experienced women lawyers. They made sure that these young leaders are outside the bars. And then after that, even after that traumatic experience, they stayed for protest for 3 months in winters under the cold sky in shelters. And also one of the discriminatory action was that we, the people who were living in that particular city, we used to bring some utilities, for example, blankets, coal for fire, water, food for these women. Thousands of women were there with their kids for 3 months under the sky in shelters. And police used to first deny that, no, we cannot give them any support, just to make them get rid of water facilities, blankets, food, so that they stay hungry and ultimately they decide to leave the space. But it didn't happen because this is the resistance that we have in the country. Also, they didn't have access to washrooms. They were not allowed to stay. Even earlier, they decided that they will be staying in hostels, and all the hostels that they were staying in, the police officials visited those hostels. They were attacked and they had surveillance, and all of them were asked to get out of those hostels. And even the property owners did not let these women who were a part of movements. Even few days back, one of the lead young women who is studying in a university, they asked her, they'd rather send her a letter that she is now rusticated from the university. She cannot continue her studies just because she is associated with this movement. And that is a human rights, right-based movement against enforced disappearances of their own family members. So they have faced torture, harassment, surveillance. Last month, one of the leaders, whose name is Samideen, she was flying out of the country for one of the human rights conferences, and at the airport, she was denied access, that she cannot leave the country. And she was told earlier she was made to sit at the airport for around quite a long, many hours. No one was telling her what's happening. Why is she not allowed to get out of the country? And later on, one of the officials came and told her that her name by the state has been entered into an exit control list. It means that she cannot leave the country, and she had to go back. We then did an entire legislation and legal process around it. But this is the emotional abuse they're putting in. All these women are under, again, serious state surveillance, and they cannot even move from their own city, from their own province. And then even if they want to get out of the country, it's really hard. Their social media platforms are continuously tagged. Even we prefer now using.
I'm so sorry. You have 2 minutes.
Sure, I'm just about to wrap up. Thank you. One of the last case that I'm going to share is about forced conversions. Every year, thousands of young women who belong to minority communities are forcefully converted to Islam, and we know the people who are culprits behind it, but the government is taking no stance. These women are abducted, these women are raped, sexually abused, and then they are not even in contact with their families. And last year, the person and the entire gang that is after this heinous act, they were given the party ticket to participate in the major elections, and they were invited by the state as guests to glorify the culprits. These are the names of few women: Asma Bibi, Asma Jahangir, Karima Baloch, who have been either assassinated, murdered, or they have been imprisoned. Or if you, for example, Gulala Ismail, she is now out of country just because she was under the threat by the state that if she does not leave, she will be killed. So these are some of the cases that women have been facing. Zina ordinance is one of the ordinance that actually criminalizes extramarital sex, but it is actually to persecute rape victims, putting all the burden. And we women say that this ordinance has put a lot of burden on women. There is really a role of religious extremism. For example, Malala Yousafzai was attacked just because she was advocating for women's education and freedom. Maybe we have just one road to action, is that we need to continue the struggle. And listening to all these stories, probably I realized that the struggle should be in a collective, amplified manner. Otherwise, I do not see any change happening in the country. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. We learned a lot. But in the discussion, we can discuss it more about, and we see how much common issues we have. Okay, we are going to discussion. We have 45 minutes of this seminar, and And if anybody has anything in heart, can raise hands, and you can comment, or if you have a question. I think Nadia must go earlier. She cannot be with us to the end of the seminar. Is it correct, Nadia?
Yes, yes. I mean, I have like maybe 20 minutes max now. Sorry,
Okay,
I thought we finished earlier. Sorry.
Okay, good. And right now I have two hands raised up, and Ruijan, you can start.
Yes, well, thank you very much, all the speakers. It was wonderful. It was very broad in concept of what women are going through in our societies, in the countries nearby. I really think that we would be able, we women who know where the problem is, would be able to one day get together, make a big coalition of all women of countries around, in the Middle East, and just put our thoughts and our heads together to see what we actually can do. I mean, when you see the two girls in Tehran being dragged into the car, and when you see those women in Afghanistan being lashed, which is absolutely heartbreaking, I think we understand the problem, and we have to do something more concrete about it. And we cannot do something more concrete unless all of us put our heads together, make a sort of coalition, a collective effort to deal with these problems, because our problems are similar, although they may vary here and there, but they are similar. And I really hope that one day would come where all of us can sit together in a Congress of Women of the Middle East and deal with all these problems one by one, which, as I said, may be a little bit different, but in essence, they are the same. It is violence and discrimination against women. And we have to sit down together and do something serious about it. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you on behalf of the campaign and the organizers of this gathering today. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruijan. Fatma, please, microphone is yours.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, I opened it, don't worry. Thank you, Susan. It was really, I appreciate all the presenters, Nadia, Jaya, and Nazela, dear Nazela. And thank you for organizing this event. I can see some of my friends from Turkish platforms, women's platforms. Zehra, Professor Zehra is here. Aslusu is here. Homa and Mona is here. Thanks for them. I mean, I want to thank them for coming, for joining us. I followed the presentation of Nadia, Professor Nadia, and she mentioned about Deniz Kandiyoti, Deniz Hoca. She's a Turkish scholar and professor. Maybe we can invite one of our meetings, Deniz Kandiyoti, and we can talk about toxic masculinity and masculinity restoration subject as well. Let me have a picture of the group if you open your videos. Yes. So we can send it to the
open the videos, please.
Yes, please open the videos. One, two, three. The first page. Let me have the first page. Then the second one. 1, 2, 3 again. Great. We all look great. Women always look great. I want to talk about one little things. I learned that Jaya is a member of the women's Every Women Treaty. I was in the meeting, Every Women Treaty meeting last week. So I think there's going to be a new treaties coming for women, and probably it's going to be some new discrimination concept will be included to that. So let's communicate, let's contact it about the Every Women Treaty, and let's take part in this study. I will let you know the details afterwards. One more thing, next year in the Commission on Status of Women meetings, please try to attend. I mean, it's a call for all of you. It's going to be a special meeting, and there is Abdulaziz Al-Wasili will be the director of the committee from Saudi Arabia. So it doesn't look very helpful, but let's make it as women. Let's stand together and make this next year meeting as much as valuable, produce valuable result for women. These are the things I would like to share with you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Fatma. Professor Tauhidi, your hand is up, please.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, and thank you. I really enjoyed listening. I didn't enjoy, actually. I was so saddened and felt deeply sad that things are as awful as, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, rather than getting better. In some respects, I know some improvements have happened, but still we have so much violence and so much power in the hands of patriarchal forces. I wanted to thank all of you for speaking about these issues, and thank the campaign against honor killing, so-called honor killing campaign for organizing such transnational events. I want especially to appreciate what Nadia Ali said about the importance of not stopping by condemning imperialism. We have been so misled by Islamists and also by some leftists who are telling us that your enemy is, for the most part, imperialism. Don't talk about our internal problems in the public, in the international spheres, because it reinforces Islamophobia. Now, the new tactic is threatening us or scaring us from Islamophobia. First of all, we know that it's not really a phobia. It is a real fear we have. There is a real fear. We have to distinguish that from, the classic Orientalism or Neo-Orientalism and imperialism. There are patriarchy everywhere. There's a scattered hegemony of patriarchy that we have to call on. We have to fight back everywhere. And we need to unite transnationally. This is so important that we have such events and remind each other that the problems are still there. Women are being killed every day just for being women and just for trying to be a normal, healthy, happy woman, not this repressed, objectified woman under these crazy garments and threat of violence constantly. So I really like the way that you emphasize that we need to challenge our internal patriarchy and not forget it just because of imperialist interventions or taking advantage of these issues for their own political ends. I emphasize that because in the academia we have problem. I hope that Nadia Ali, I think would agree with me that there are academics, both those from Middle Eastern origins or Muslim tradition, but also Western white feminists who are telling us, don't talk about these problems so much in the public, don't perpetuate or reinforce Islamophobia. But they don't understand that we cannot be quiet, we cannot be silenced just because some imperialists are taking advantage of our agonies. So I know it's a very delicate balance to make, but still we need to make that balance and make that emphasis and show our problems and use international supports. We cannot deny international supports for feminists. The reactionary forces, the patriarchal forces have their allies, but they want us to have no international allies. They threaten us by being sell out to the foreigners, to the Western forces, to use sources, feminist international alliances and solidarity. So we need to fight back and be more articulate in, against such arguments, which is to me apologistic and just reactionary. We have some reactionary leftists now that have become, unfortunately, as staying on the side of the patriarchy rather than liberation and equality. So that was what I wanted to emphasize and appreciate about all of you who presented these very sad realities, and also emphasize what Ruhi Shafiei said too, and also I think Fatma said that we need to really practically reinforce transnational solidarity between us and among us. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much. But since I have to go, do you mind, Susan, if I just take a few moments to say a few words?
No, not at all, please.
Yes. So I want to sort of speak to that in the current moment when, as we speak, Lebanon is under attack, Palestine continues to be under attack. And I have had some very uncomfortable moments. So, to give you some background, 2005, I was invited to a World Congress on Iraq in the context of the invasion. And this took place in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. And it was all sort of global anti-war activist, leftist. And every speaker for 3 days either started or finished their talk by saying, we have to support the armed resistance against US imperialism. At the time in 2005, Iraqi innocent civilians were killed on a weekly basis by the so-called insurgents, which, as we know later on, actually metamorphosed into the different militias, including ISIS. When I said at the time when I gave my talk, which was about the impact of the invasion and occupation on women in Iraq, I was told not to be divisive. And I was hated in the room of 300 people. These days, I find myself, as someone who has always been sort of in solidarity with Palestinians, but I find myself often now also in awkward situations. For example, there was the British Middle East Studies conference, and I was going to participate in a panel, Feminism in Palestine. And I was going to suggest, thinking that this is a safe space, everyone at the conference and everyone on the panel did not have to be convinced that what is happening is an atrocity, it's a genocide. So I was going to reflect on the question, is there a feminist space for critique of Hamas? Well, evidently there wasn't. I was not allowed to do that. Other speakers said, this is not the time to speak about it. And I disagree. I think we can be in solidarity with Palestine. We can be, or we should be in solidarity also, with Lebanon. But doesn't mean that we applaud, either Hamas or Hezbollah. And I think that's the either or, I find really problematic. And I, of course, find that from what I've known over the years from the Iranian diaspora, both activists and also students I had, of course, that's really so polarized as well. I think maybe in recent years, it's become more nuanced, but, for many years, it was either you do this, either you critique the regime, or you are, critical of the US. And I mean, I just think that, if you look, especially Iraq is such a good example that you need to do both, you need to do both. And I'm really sorry, but I will have to go now, and maybe I'll stay 5 more minutes and then I'll go. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nadia. It's a very, very important issue you and Professor Tawhidi mentioned here. There is a dilemma, especially for us in diaspora, and especially Iranians, where we should stay. And I agree with both of you. I have 2 hands up. Nazila, you have something to add, please?
Yes, I would like to thank Professor Tawhidi for her contribution, and I would like to add to Professor Nadia's point as well. I mean, when it comes to these things, it's really a one way or another. It was the case for Afghanistan as well, and Taliban was legitimized in the first place as an anti-imperialist group that was victorious, and that US lost to and withdraw basically, but in reality there was no deeper level criticism of the structure. And these actually the people who are legitimizing this narrative of the Taliban in the West are liberals that are using the language of tolerance, the language of we have to be tolerating of these differences, and also this is cultural relativity, this is the culture of Afghanistan, and they're using all these framings in language, unfortunately. And when it came to the first time women went head to toe in hijab after the Taliban takeover in 2021, a professor, a scholar, and I highlight this in my article as well, he said, liberals can be equally intolerant. This is women's choice, whereas that wasn't women's choice. They basically were framing it as this is a choice that women chose, and we have to respect it. Unfortunately, and Hamas actually celebrated Taliban's victory in August 2021, and right now it's glorified across women in the Western world, and women's hijab is out of it's not women's covering, and uncovering is also not seen in a case-by-case basis, whereas what happens in France to women compared to Iran and Afghanistan is so much more different. And I just wanted to contribute that as well, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nazila. We have another hands up too, actually. Zehra, if I pronounce your name correctly, please, microphone is yours.
Thank you. I'm sorry I cannot turn on my camera. First, I would like to thank the organizers and the speakers for addressing this really important point. But the last actually conversation really gets into the a very important, touchy subject, and often paralyzes us in different contexts and different ways. I just want to, I'm not going to say anything new, but just bring a few things into, again, everybody's attention, just a reminder. Yes, we have to acknowledge the patriarchal essence of vast majority of interpreters of Islam, and how they kind of control women's lives in Muslim majority countries. And we have to acknowledge the role of the external powers in this. And then we have to put them together all the time. I think that is the I just have to, again, just as a reminder, just Islamization. And when I say Islamization, I mean the rise of conservative Islam, Salafi movement and Taliban and all of that has been a project of the United States during the Cold War years in its policy of containment of communism. Islam was promoted and without really paying attention to who is Islam, that is the important thing, was promoted. Taliban is a creation of the United States against the Russian influence in Afghanistan. So we have to remember these. And on the other hand, we have to remember something else. It is like, or just like the in the West today, with the rise of right-wing populist movements, somebody like Marine Le Pen, who has never been a friend of feminists and actually anti-feminist, can actually promote her anti-Islamism and anti-migration policies in a framework that dehumanizes Islam, because French are supposed to protect themselves against the terrible Muslim men. So we have to really, we cannot be simplistic. And Nadia, I think, left now, the good friend. There is the, I can understand her qualm about this, like can we criticize Hamas in a feminist space? We have to, even if we're booed, and then even if we are declared as I don't know, divisive people and so on. But we have to tell the truth with its all complexity at every setting. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for your comments. It was very interesting. And the next person is Manija, please.
Good afternoon or good evening. I don't know where everybody is. I am very grateful for all the speakers and everything that they said, and the people who chimed in. I think people, when women were told, or even if still they are saying, that you are not going to talk, you have to talk imperialism and no one else, and you cannot talk about the issues, specific issues. These are mostly men, almost all men, because men at those times, they were in charge and they were defined, and women, even women would follow. But this is a different time, and we should, and we have, and we need to, at all times, wherever we are, whoever saying anything like this, educate them. You shouldn't attack them. We should educate them. That, for example, however we can, each of us have abilities to educate other people. Use it as a way in which you straighten them up. That's what I do. It doesn't matter where I am, who it is, what situation it is. If somebody gets out of line in terms of discrimination against anybody and they want to shut them down, I just put my foot in my mouth. And the other thing that came to me, and one of the friends talked about it, is having a gathering. And I think having in-person gathering is important for us. And I really support and would do everything that if we have a very large gathering someplace and publicize it, that women from all backgrounds, all, orientations, they get together and talk about these issues, women's issues, the concerns about women. And for somebody like me, I'm not concerned about myself anymore. I'm concerned about the generation that is behind us. And we need that type of gathering. Zoom and Zoom and in this type of meeting, as important as they are, they're not doing the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is very interesting. Educate men. I don't know. I hope so we can. But this is a very good suggestion.
I wanted to say, if we can put it for a year, start planning it a year ahead. We all have to, let's see what we can do. If we say, no, we can't do it, we would never do anything about it. But if we have it in our mind and say, okay, this is a plan, this is something that we need to do, maybe we can get it done. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very good suggestion. Let's see. But I don't have any hands up anymore. I don't know if anybody has anything in heart. If not, we can end it earlier because this program was for 2 hours. But at the end, I will say that in 1970, the American feminist and poet Robin Morgan edited a book titled 3 Words: Sisterhood is Powerful. It was an anthology of writing from prominent women's rights advocates. In 2003, she edited Sisterhood Forever. Sisterhood is Forever. Again, 3 words. A follow-up anthology for the new millennium. Women from our region, more than any time before, as our distinguished speakers and Professor Tauhidi and many others explain it here. More than any time before in our history, we must remind ourselves that sisterhood is powerful. As long as we fight separately, we will remain weak and our voices will not be heard. We must come together, fight together, stay together to be a strong, strong voice. We must be as strong that, so strong that men in power will have no choice but to listen to our voices. For this reason, a group of us, some of our friends, our sisters are here, took the idea to form a transnational network for women in WANA region. We will probably hold an online conference soon to discuss the future activities of the network. I will invite all the fellow sisters here to join us. Let us be strong. Let us be one voice that can explode in the world. So I invite all of you. If you want, Fatma, Shaheen, and I can be contact person and inform you about our activities. And if you want to join us, you are welcome. Remember, solidarity and sisterhood are our keys words for our future. I will thank you, all of you, to be here to join us. But first of all, I will thank you, our speakers. Nadia, I think she left us, and they had a very fascinating presentations. And we found out that we have a lot of issues on agenda, very common, and we can have common fight. So I want to thank those who cooperated with us in organizing this seminar and making the film use. So I would like to express my gratitude to Shaheen Haidari and Parveen Malek for their technical assistance and let us to have this wonderful seminar together. I would like to thank all of you, and I hope we keep in touch. We will end this seminar with the campaign's anthem. Thank you very much. Have a good time in future. Thank you.
پروین جان اگه داری آهنگ رو پخش میکنی
با گام‌های استوار پرتوان و پایدار دستان به دست هم سرود و هم قدم من یک زنم در نبرد با ارتجا کوه عزم و رزم آهنم من یک زنم من یک زنم ایستاده‌ام چو کوه پر غرور و پر شکوه موجم روان چو رود پر خروش و پر سرود من یک زنم در نبرد با ارتجا کوه عزم و رزم آهنم من یک زنم من یک زنم تا به کی نشان ز خون ما تا به کی ز خون ما صد نشان به کوچه ها ای مرام زن ستیز نیستت ره گریز من یک زنم در نبرد با ارتجا کوه عزم و رزم آهنم من یک زنم من یک زنم با لبان دوخته بالهای سوخته بانگ ما نشد خموش این بود مرا خروش من یک زنم من یک زنم مام کاوه ها مام کوروشم این منم که رستم زادم ژینا حدیث نیکا نوید تهمینم گرد آفرید آزادم